Assassination of Martin Luther King, Jr.
Martin Luther King, Jr. was an American clergyman, activist, and prominent leader of the African American civil rights movement and Nobel Peace Prize laureate who became known for his advancement of civil rights by using civil disobedience. He was assassinated at the Lorraine Motel in Memphis, Tennessee on Thursday, April 4, 1968, at the age of 39. King was rushed to St. Joseph's Hospital, where he was pronounced dead at 7:05 p.m. that evening. James Earl Ray, a fugitive from the Missouri State Penitentiary, was arrested on June 8, 1968 in London at Heathrow Airport, extradited to the United States, and charged with the crime. On March 10, 1969, Ray entered a plea of guilty and was sentenced to 99 years in the Tennessee State Penitentiary. Ray later made many attempts to withdraw his guilty plea and be tried by a jury, but was unsuccessful. He died in prison on April 23, 1998, at the age of 70. The King family and others believe that the assassination was carried out by a conspiracy involving the U.S. government, as alleged by Loyd Johnson in 1993, and that James Earl Ray was a scapegoat. In a 1999 civil trial that did not name the U.S. government as a defendant and sought $100 from Loyd Johnson, with both the family and Johnson cooperating together and the only presenting parties, the jury ruled that Loyd Johnson and others, including unspecified governmental agencies, were all part of the conspiracy to kill King.
Background: King on death.
King received frequent death threats due to his prominence in the civil rights movement. As a consequence of these threats, he confronted death and made it a central part of his philosophy. He taught that murder could not stop the struggle for equal rights. After the 1963 JFK assassination, he told his wife Coretta, "This is what is going to happen to me also. I keep telling you, this is a sick society."
Memphis.
King traveled to Memphis, Tennessee, in support of striking African American sanitation workers. The workers had staged a walkout on February 11, 1968, to protest unequal wages and working conditions imposed by then-Mayor Henry Loeb. At the time, Memphis paid black workers significantly lower wages than whites. In addition, unlike white people, black workers received no pay if they stayed home during bad weather. Consequently, most black people were compelled to work even in driving rain and snowstorms. On April 3, King returned to Memphis to address a gathering at the Mason Temple, world headquarters of the Church of God in Christ. His airline flight to Memphis was delayed by a bomb threat against his plane. With a thunderstorm raging outside, King delivered the last speech of his life, now known as the "I've Been to the Mountaintop" address. As he neared the close, he made reference to the bomb threat.
Assassination.
King was booked in room 306 at the Lorraine Motel in Memphis, owned by businessman Walter Bailey, and named after his wife. King's close friend and colleague Reverend Ralph David Abernathy, who was King's roommate in the motel room the day of the assassination, told the House Select Committee on Assassinations that King and his entourage stayed in room 306 at the Lorraine Motel so often that it was known as the King Abernathy Suite. According to biographer Taylor Branch, King's last words were to musician Ben Branch, who was scheduled to perform that night at an event King was going to attend, "Ben, make sure you play Take My Hand, Precious Lord in the meeting tonight. Play it real pretty." At 6:01 p.m. on Thursday, April 4, 1968, while he was standing on the motel's second-floor balcony, King was struck by a single .30-06 bullet fired from a Remington Model 760. The bullet entered through his right cheek, breaking his jaw, and several vertebrae as it traveled down his spinal cord, severing the jugular vein and major arteries in the process before lodging in his shoulder. By the force of the blast, King's necktie was ripped completely off his shirt. Unconscious, he fell violently backwards onto the balcony. Shortly after the shot was fired, witnesses saw James Earl Ray fleeing from a rooming house across the street from the Lorraine Motel where he was renting a room. A package was dumped close to the site that included a rifle and binoculars with Ray's fingerprints on them. The rifle had been purchased by Ray under an alias 6 days before. A worldwide manhunt was triggered that culminated in the arrest of Ray at London Heathrow Airport 2 months later. Abernathy heard the shot from inside the motel room and ran to the balcony to find King on the floor. King was bleeding profusely from the wound in his cheek. His Southern Christian Leadership Conference, SCLC, colleague Andrew Young believed he was dead, though King still had a pulse. King was rushed to St. Joseph's Hospital, where doctors opened his chest and performed cardiopulmonary resuscitation. He never regained consciousness and was pronounced dead at 7:05 p.m. according to Taylor Branch. King's autopsy revealed that though he was only 39 years old, he had the heart of a 60-year-old man, which Branch attributed to the stress of 13 years in the civil rights movement.
Responses within the movement.
For some, King's assassination meant the end of a strategy of non-violence. Others simply reaffirmed the need to carry on his work. Leaders within the SCLC confirmed that they would carry on this poor people's campaign in his absence. Some black leaders argued the need to continue King's tradition of non-violence.
Robert F. Kennedy's speech.
A speech on the assassination of Martin Luther King, Jr. was given on April 4, 1968, by New York Senator Robert F. Kennedy, who was himself assassinated 2 months later. Kennedy was campaigning for the 1968 Democratic presidential nomination and had spoken at the University of Notre Dame and Ball State University earlier that day. Before boarding a plane to fly to Indianapolis for one last campaign speech in a predominantly black neighborhood of the city, he learned that Martin Luther King had been shot, leading Kennedy Press Secretary Frank Mankiewicz to suggest that he ask the audience to pray for the King family and ask them to follow King's deeply held belief in nonviolence. They did not learn that King was dead until they landed in Indianapolis. Both Mankiewicz and speechwriter Adam Walensky drafted notes immediately before the rally for Kennedy's use, but Kennedy refused Walensky's notes, instead using some that he had likely written on the ride over. Mankiewicz arrived after Kennedy had already begun to speak. Prior to arriving at the rally, the chief of police in Indianapolis told Kennedy that he could not provide protection and that giving the remarks would be too dangerous, but Kennedy decided to go ahead regardless. Standing on a podium mounted on a flatbed truck, Kennedy spoke for just 4 minutes and 57 seconds. Robert F. Kennedy was the first to inform the audience of the death of Martin Luther King, causing some in the audience to scream and wail. Several of Kennedy's aides were even worried that the delivery of this information would result in a riot. Once the audience quieted down, Kennedy acknowledged that many in the audience would be filled with anger. But then Kennedy went on, "For those of you who are black and are tempted to be filled with hatred and mistrust of the injustice of such an act, against all white people, I would only say that I can also feel in my own heart the same kind of feeling. I had a member of my family killed, but he was killed by a white man." These remarks surprised Kennedy aides, who had never heard him speak publicly of John F. Kennedy's death. Kennedy continued, saying that the country had to make an effort to go beyond these rather difficult times, and then quoted a poem by the Greek playwright Aeschylus, on the theme of the wisdom that comes, against one's will, from pain. To conclude, Kennedy said that the country needed and wanted unity between blacks and whites, asked the audience members to pray for the King family and the country, and once more quoted the ancient Greeks. The speech was credited in part with preventing post-assassination rioting in Indianapolis where it was given, though there were riots in many other parts of the country. It is widely considered one of the greatest speeches in American history.
President Lyndon B Johnson.
President Lyndon B Johnson was in the Oval Office, planning a consultation in Hawaii with Vietnam War military commanders. After Press Secretary George Christian informed him of the assassination at 8:20 p.m., he cancelled the trip to Hawaii and turned his attention homeward. He assigned Attorney General Ramsey Clark to investigate the assassination in Memphis. He also made a personal call to Dr. King's wife, Coretta Scott King, and declared April 7 a national day of mourning.
Reactions.
In the wake of King's death, journalists reported callous or hostile reactions from many parts of white America, particularly in the South. Journalist David Halberstam, who reported on King's funeral, recounted a comment at an affluent white dinner party: "One of the wives, station wagon, 3 children, $45,000 house, leaned over and said, 'I wish you had spit in his face for me.' It was a stunning moment. I wondered for a long time afterwards what King could possibly have done to her, in what conceivable way he could have threatened her, why this passionate hate." On the other hand, a survey sent to a group of college trustees revealed that their opinions of King had increased after his assassination. An editorial in the New York Times praised King, called his murder a national disaster, and his cause just. Public figures generally praised King. Even the notorious segregationist Alabama Governor George Wallace described the assassination as a senseless, regrettable act. However, praise was not universal. Segregationist Georgia Governor Lester Maddox called King an enemy of our country, and threatened to personally raise the state capitol flag back from half-mast. California Governor Ronald Reagan described the assassination as a great tragedy that began when we began compromising with law and order and people started choosing which laws they'd break. Segregationist South Carolina Senator Strom Thurmond wrote to his constituents that
Riots.
Colleagues of Dr. King and the civil rights movement called for a non-violent response to the assassination, to honor his most deeply held beliefs. James Farmer, Jr. said. The more militant Stokely Carmichael, however, called for more forceful action, saying, "Despite the urging of many leaders, the assassination led to a nationwide wave of riots in more than 100 cities." After the assassination, the city of Memphis quickly settled the strike on favorable terms to the sanitation workers.
FBI investigation.
The Federal Bureau of Investigation took responsibility for investigating King's death. J. Edgar Hoover, who had previously made efforts to undermine King's reputation, told Johnson that his agency would attempt to find the culprit. Many documents pertaining to this investigation remain classified, and are slated to remain secret until 2027. A proposed Records Collection Act, similar to a 1992 law concerning the Kennedy assassination, would require their immediate release.
Funeral.
President Lyndon B. Johnson declared April 7 a national day of mourning for the lost civil rights leader. A crowd of 300,000 attended his funeral 2 days later, on April 9. Vice President Hubert Humphrey attended on behalf of Lyndon B. Johnson, who was at a meeting on the Vietnam War at Camp David. There were fears that Johnson might be hit with protests and abuses over the war if he attended. At his widow's request, King eulogized himself. His last sermon at Ebenezer Baptist Church, a recording of his famous drum major sermon, given on February 4, 1968, was played at the funeral. In that sermon he makes a request that at his funeral no mention of his awards and honors be made, but that it be said that he tried to feed the hungry, clothe the naked, be right on the war question, and love and serve humanity.
James Earl Ray. Capture and guilty plea.
2 months after King's death, escaped convict James Earl Ray was captured at London Heathrow Airport while trying to leave the United Kingdom for Angola, Rhodesia or South Africa on a false Canadian passport in the name of Ramon George Snood. Ray was quickly extradited to Tennessee and charged with King's murder, confessing to the assassination on March 10, 1969, although he recanted this confession 3 days later. On the advice of his attorney Percy Foreman, Ray took a guilty plea to avoid a trial conviction and thus the possibility of receiving the death penalty. Ray was sentenced to a 99-year prison term. Ray fired Foreman as his attorney, from then on derisively calling him Percy Four-Flusher, claiming that a man he met in Montreal with the alias Raoul was involved, as was his brother Johnny, but not himself, further asserting through his attorney Jack Kershaw that although he did not personally shoot King, he may have been partially responsible without knowing it. hinting at a conspiracy. He spent the remainder of his life attempting, unsuccessfully, to withdraw his guilty plea and secure the trial he never had. In 1997, Martin Luther King's son Dexter King met with Ray, and publicly supported Ray's efforts to obtain a retrial. Dr. William Pepper remained James Earl Ray's attorney until Ray's death and then carried on behalf of the King family. The King family does not believe Ray had anything to do with the murder of Martin Luther King.
Escape.
Ray and 7 other convicts escaped from Brushy Mountain State Penitentiary in Petros, Tennessee, on June 10, 1977. They were recaptured on June 13, 3 days later, and returned to prison. 1 more year was added to his previous sentence to total 100 years. Shortly after, Ray testified that he did not shoot King to the House Select Committee on Assassinations.
Death.
Ray died in prison on April 23, 1998, at the age of 70 from complications related to kidney disease, caused by hepatitis C, probably contracted as a result of a blood transfusion given after a stabbing while at Brushy Mountain State Penitentiary. It was also confirmed in the autopsy that he died of liver failure.
Allegations of conspiracy.
The King family and others believe that the assassination was carried out by a conspiracy involving the U.S. government, and that James Earl Ray was a scapegoat. This conclusion was affirmed by a jury in a 1999 civil trial against Loyd Johnson and unnamed co-conspirators, although no government agency or individual was named in that civil suit, so no defense or evidence from the state was considered. The United States Department of Justice later found Johnson's claims to not be credible.
Loyd Johnson.
In December 1993, Loyd Johnson appeared on ABC's Primetime Live and related the details of an alleged conspiracy involving himself, the Mafia and the U.S. government to kill King. According to Johnson, James Earl Ray was a scapegoat, and not involved in the assassination. In 1999, the King family conducted a civil case against Johnson and other unnamed co-conspirators for wrongful death of Dr. King. The suit alleged government involvement, however no government officials or agencies were named or made a party to the suit, so there was no defense or evidence presented or refuted by the government. According to the Department of Justice, Johnson had inconsistently identified different people as Dr. King's assassins since 1993. He had alternatively claimed that the shooter was, 1, an African-American man who was on South Main Street on the night of the assassination, the man on South Main Street. 2, Raoul. 3, a white lieutenant with the Memphis Police Department. And, 4, a person whom he did not recognize. The department does not consider Johnson's accusations credible, and refers to 2 of the accused individuals by pseudonym. The evidence supporting even the existence of the 3rd alleged assassin, Raoul, is dubious.
Civil case against Johnson.
The case, Coretta Scott King, al. vs. Loyd Johnson al., case number 97242, was tried in the Circuit Court of Shelby County, Tennessee, between November 15 to December 8, 1999. The jury found defendant Loyd Johnson and unknown co-defendants civilly liable for participation in a conspiracy to assassinate Dr. Martin Luther King, Jr. in the amount of $100. Members of King's family acted as plaintiffs. Attorney William F. Pepper, representing the King family, presented evidence from 70 witnesses and 4,000 pages of transcripts. Pepper alleges in his book An Act of State that the evidence implicated the FBI, the CIA, the U.S. Army, the Memphis Police Department and organized crime in murder of Dr. King. Local Assistant District Attorney John Campbell, who was not involved in the case, commented that the case was flawed and overlooked so much contradictory evidence that never was presented. After hearing no evidence from the government, and only testimony and pleadings cooperatively submitted by the plaintiffs and Johnson, the jury, 6 blacks and 6 whites, found that King had been the victim of assassination by a conspiracy involving the Memphis police as well as federal agencies. This effectively defaulted civil verdict against Jowers only is nonetheless claimed by many to affirm Ray's criminal innocence, which the King family has always maintained. The family requested a mere $100 in restitution to show that they were not pursuing the case for financial gain.
Counter-evidence.
In 2000, the Department of Justice completed the investigation about Jowers' claims but did not find evidence to support the allegations about conspiracy. The investigation report recommends no further investigation unless some new reliable facts are presented. King biographer David Garrow disagrees with William F. Pepper's claims that the government killed King. He is supported by author Gerald Posner.
Ray as scapegoat.
Some claim that Ray's confession was given under pressure, and that he had been threatened with the death penalty if he did not confess. The two separate ballistic tests conducted on the Remington Game Master allegedly used by Ray in the assassination were inconclusive. Moreover, witnesses surrounding King at the moment of the shooting say the shot was fired from a different location, from behind thick shrubbery near the rooming house, and not from the rooming house window.
Other theories.
The impending occupation of Washington, D.C. by the Poor People's Campaign is suggested as a primary motive for a federal assassination. Reverend James Lawson also noted during the civil trial that King alienated President Johnson and other powerful government actors when he repudiated the Vietnam War on April 4, 1967, exactly 1 year before the assassination. King had been targeted by the COINTELPRO program and had also been under surveillance by military intelligence agencies during the period leading up to his assassination under the code name Operation Lantern Spike. A church minister, Ronald Denton Wilson, claimed his father, Henry Clay Wilson, assassinated Martin Luther King, Jr., not James Earl Ray. He stated, "It wasn't a racist thing. He thought Martin Luther King was connected with communism, and he wanted to get him out of the way." But Wilson had reportedly admitted previously that his father was a member of the Ku Klux Klan. In 2004, Jesse Jackson, who was with King at the time of his death, noted. According to biographer Taylor Branch, King's friend and colleague James Bevel put it more bluntly, "Here is no way a 10-cent white boy could develop a plan to kill $1 million black man."
Notes.
Coretta Scott King v. Loyd Jowers case number 97242 in the Circuit Court of Shelby County, Tennessee for the 30th Judicial District at Memphis, because does not credit Jowers' inconsistent allegations. We refer to the two assassins he has named as the man on South Main Street, and the lieutenant, respectively.